welcome back to the show. It is so good to have you here. It's been, I think, 2 years or more since you were here last.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be back.
I love that you are revisiting once again the world of Russell Middlebrook, focusing again on his friend Otto. You've got a brand new book in the Otto Digmore series out. Tell us all about that.
So for people who may not be familiar with me or these particular books, back in 2003, I wrote a book called Geography Club, which was one of the first gay teen books that sort of broke out in a mainstream way. I published a series of sequels. Eventually, I started self-publishing these books. So by the fourth book, I was self-publishing. Those first four books became a young adult series, the Russell Middlebrook series. Then, this was sort of coinciding with the golden age of self-publishing, I decided to launch a new series about Russell in his 20s. So he had started out as a teenager in a young adult series, and then he grew up and he became new adult. And I kind of think I still might be the only author to have done this about his own character. I have had a character grow up and switch genres from young adult to new adult, and I wrote 3 books. That was called Russell Middlebrook, The Futon Years. And then one of the characters that I'd always really, really liked, named Otto Digmore, he was a burn survivor. When he was a child, he was in an accident with some fire, and he burned half of his face. And I liked him. He was sort of a love and interest for Russell back when Russell was a teenager. And then in the newer books, Russell moves to Los Angeles, to Hollywood, to try to make it as a screenwriter. And Otto, meanwhile, who is now also in his early 20s, is trying to make it as an actor, despite the fact that he has this scar on half his face. And I thought, my God, audiences like this character. I really liked this character. It seemed really timely, the whole normalization of minorities that are trying to get into the mainstream. Here's this actor, he considers himself disabled, and he's trying to make it in Hollywood, but Hollywood isn't really ready. They don't know what to do with him. Plus, there's a lot of prejudice and bigotry. So I launched another series about Otto Digmore, about his struggles trying to make it as an actor in Hollywood. The first book was called The Otto Digmore Difference. And that was sort of a road trip that Russell, who is a supporting character in these books, Russell and Otto go on a road trip so that Otto can get this movie role. And then, complications ensue. And then this latest book, which is called The Otto Digmore Decision, Russell, who is a screenwriter now, finally has a movie being produced, and he maneuvers an audition. He writes the role for Otto and gets Otto an audition, and Otto gets the part. So finally, Russell and Otto are getting their happy ending, or are they? Because in this book, it turns out the director is sort of a jackass, and he's kind of ruining the movie. The movie is a medieval heist. It's about a heist taking place. They're trying to steal the gold from a king, and the characters are, ragtag team of characters, and Otto's playing the thief, one of the thieves. Anyway, so then they have to figure out how are we going to save this movie without the director knowing about it. So it's sort of a comedy of errors. I am also a screenwriter, as you know, and it is, I wouldn't say it's directly based on my experiences as a screenwriter, but it's based on my observations. There's a lot of Russell in me. And in this, they're on the set of a movie, which I have done. And so it's a comedy. It's a comedy of errors about the craziness of Hollywood. And it's also, like the first book, I like to say that it's a love story between two friends. It's not really a classic romance, but Russell and Otto are best friends, and they do anything for each other. And it's no longer romantic at this point, or at least not really romantic. I loved writing this character. He may be my favorite character to have ever written. I feel like there's nothing else like him. There wasn't anything like him in gay YA, and there isn't anything in gay fiction, it seems to me, nothing exactly like this. And then it's also fun to be able to write, to sort of put some of my frustrations with Hollywood on paper and explore. I think everybody's interested in Hollywood. Everyone's interested in movie making. And I can kind of go behind the scenes and talk about it. And so it's a great experience. And it's been out, the book has been out for a couple of weeks now, and people seem to like it. I am always touched every time somebody likes my books, and every time somebody is moved by one of my books. That's awesome, and it does make it worthwhile.
You've written these characters now for 10 books, the Russell Middlebrook universe. If I did the fast math right, I think it's 10 books now.
Yes, I think you're right. 9. 10 if you include a short story, yeah.
And they're still extremely fresh. And one of the things that I like about the series so well is this friendship between Otto and Russell, because you see them evolve so much through the books. And that's something that you don't tend to get in a lot of series. You may see everybody as a little tangential thing, but these two are so tight. What's it like to write characters across so many books, for one thing, where they are always the primaries? And of course, you've mixed it up between Otto being a primary and Russell being a primary between the series, but still, they're front and center in each other's books. And what's that like for you as an author in terms of like keeping things fresh and then getting to revisit these characters every so often?
Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. That's really nice to hear. And it has been artistically extremely satisfying. But I'll tell you, at the beginning of this project, the vow I made to myself was, I'm not going to repeat myself. If I don't have a new story to tell, I'm not just going to do these for the money. I'm going to do these because I feel like I have something to say. So for better or for worse, every book has been a radically different story. And then when you look at the three individual series, they all have a different sensibility. The Elephant of Surprise was about this group called Freegans who they dumpster dive, and they don't believe in buying things. And so they've got this community of barter and, eating roadkill and eating from dumpsters. And I was fascinated by this phenomenon. And so I wrote this book where Russell befriends one of these and sort of learns their philosophy and has an adventure. And a lot of people didn't like that. I thought it was so interesting. I had a ball researching that and writing that book. And I don't really care that some significant people said that about Otto too. They said, "Oh, I don't want to read about a character who has a scar on his face." Well, I don't care that, don't read my books then. This is what excited me at the time and excites me now. One of the interesting things I was able to do, because they are self-published and the lead time between writing and publication is so quick. With this particular book, I wrote it in the first half of this year, and I actually could have. You could release them even faster, but I'm very rigorous in my editing, and then these also have audible editions, and we wanted them to come out at the same time. So I had to basically finish the book and then set it aside for 3 months while the audio was recorded and all of that. But even so, I'm able to write these books in real time. So I'm commenting on things that are happening to me as I'm writing them. And for example, Russell and Otto are lamenting the injustice of Hollywood, how it feels like the insiders get all the breaks and the rules only apply to the people on the outside. And at the time that I'm writing this, the whole college admission scandal with Felicity Huffman and all these celebrities are getting their kids in college by paying SAT tutors and all the rest. I'm able to incorporate this. It's like this is going on, they're talking about this as it's happening, as the news is breaking in the book, and they can comment on real world events. It's sort of a subplot about Trump, what's going on with Trump and Russell's feeling of ennui and alienation. That's part of this book. There's an ongoing debate. Should authors be timely or should they be timeless? And should you quote music or TV shows? Because it can make a book seem so dated so quickly. And we're all going for timeless. We write our book, 3 years, if it's traditionally 3 years before it's published, and if it's self-published, 6 months. But we want it to sell for years after that. I mean, we don't want it to feel, when I read a book that uses the word groovy, I know that it was written in 1971. But with these books, I'm embracing that. And they're sort of snapshots in time, and which I think makes them interesting. I mean, with the first Foutonnieres book, which I wrote in 2014, Prep had just come out. Maybe 2013. And so Russell is single at the time, and all of these guys are, I can talk about the whole barebacking phenomenon, and Russell and one guy's on Prep. I thought it was really relevant, and people who were struggling with all these issues can read about them. But now the book is like a snapshot in that particular moment in time when this concept was introduced, and this single gay guy who is sexually active is negotiating and trying to figure out what's right for him. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is another thing that I don't think a lot of writers have been able to do. At least unless you're self-publishing, you don't have the luxury to do this. And for me, it's made the whole project even more interesting.
With the Otto books in particular, you really get to poke around in Hollywood And as you mentioned, and we'll talk about one of these in just a minute, one of your movie projects. How much of that influences what goes on with Otto and with Russell and the frustrations that they have? How autobiographical is this?
Well, the frustrations are very, 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 very autobiographical. Some of the successes are pure wish fulfillment, like getting a $45 million movie produced. That has not happened to me yet. I wish it had. But I do think, I'm fascinated with writing, and I think I like books, but for me, screenplays are such a pure medium. It's just, I'm fascinated with story. I always have been. I'm fascinated with plot, perfectly constructed plot. And screenplays, because you have such a short amount of time to tell your story, they have to be so economical. So I'm fascinated by Hollywood. I'm fascinated by movies. I totally geek out on movies. I like TV too. So it's been great to be able to take my experience and I hopefully make it very commercial, make it accessible to people who are not in the industry, but also give them, things are exaggerated, but they're not exaggerated that much. At one point, Otto is in Hollywood before Russell, and Russell arrives, and Otto is explaining how important it is the way you look, and you are judged by the shoes you wear. Well, that's based on a conversation I had with somebody in Hollywood. It's like, you can't wear those shoes to a pitch meeting because everybody dresses very casual in Hollywood, except for the shoes. And the shoes can be casual too, but they're going to be, $1,200. And the shoes are the way you signal to people that you're not an amateur, that you have money, that you're a player. And I find that kind of thing, it's so tribal, it's so specific to the industry. But then, at one point, Russell understands that the same standards are not applied to writers as they are to actors, because everybody assumes writers have no fashion sense and they're all poor and they're all sort of pathetic geek dorks and losers anyway. So the rules that apply to actors don't necessarily apply to writers, and that there are other rules that apply to writers. And like I said, I'm fascinated by all this stuff just on a sociological level. It interests me. And I hope other people are too. So often, what I see on TV and in movies and even in other books when it comes to the publishing industry or when it comes to Hollywood, it's just sheer fantasy, like the TV show Younger, which is actually a good show, but they'll acquire a book and then a month later the book is released. And it's like, no, it's offensive to me. They're not even trying to give it any semblance. Like I said, I am exaggerating things. I'm exaggerating the character, but I'm more interested in the emotional truth to it all and the actual nuts and bolts of it.
Do you think Otto's going to become a trilogy?
Otto is definitely not a trilogy. The series is over. It's a 2-book series, and it is possible there will be, well, I did leave it open-ended to start a new series, which is related to my life again, that it could be, I'm a digital nomad. I sold my house. My husband and I sold our house 3 years ago, and we've been traveling the world ever since. And it could be, I will not make any promises, but it could be that if I start another series, that'll be the next phase in Russell and Otto's lives, that maybe they will do something similar.
Let's talk a little bit about film. You've got a movie that has at least wrapped photography called Project Payday, which is based on one of your books called Project Sweet Life. Start
Correct.
us off with a little bit about what this book was about.
Project Payday, I'm just going to refer to it as the current title because otherwise it confuses people. Project Payday is 3 15-year-olds are told by their parents that they have to get summer jobs. They reject that because they had been thinking that 15 is the year of the optional summer job, and they were just going to hang out together. It was their last summer of freedom. But instead, their parents are saying, you have to get a job. So they invent fake jobs, and then they embark on a series of get-rich-quick schemes to make the money that they need to show to their parents to convince them that they actually have real jobs. So it is a comedy of errors, sort of farce thing. Honestly, it does have a more, it's a comic. It was a comic book. It's a comic movie. They get involved in a local adventure. And of course, every scheme that they try is a debacle, and they end up working much harder than if they'd just gotten jobs in the first place. But of course, They're also looking for a local treasure to solve a mystery. I wrote it before Stranger Things, but it has sort of a retro vibe, kids on their bikes in the summer. It's very, very much. And in fact, the movie is full of nods to both Stranger Things and The Goonies, which is the other movie that was sort of inspired by, even though I don't particularly like that movie. I like that sensibility. And I'm trying to capture a serious moment in the sense that I get frustrated both in movies and in books. It feels like books and movies for teens today either skew young, they're either for kids, like middle grade, and they're innocent, or they're edgy. And they're, about kids having sex and kids being cool and kids, they're like book smart. And there's sex comedies. And there's not a lot for that middle ground, like the 14, 15-year-old. And I actually think that's a really interesting age because when I was that age, I distinctly remember I wanted to grow older. I wanted to be an adult. I wanted to be able to drive. But I knew that I was going to have to give something up. I was going to have to give up that freedom and that innocence that comes from being a kid where you have no responsibility. And 3 full months of freedom, you don't have a job, and nobody cares. I wanted to capture that moment of being old enough to know you're no longer innocent and your childhood is slipping away and appreciating it. Mm-hmm. On that last year before, then you do become an adult, and then you do have to deal with, sex and money and all these other. I mean, I'm oversimplifying things a little bit, but I do think that's what I was trying to capture. That sort of like the last year, you're too old for trick or treating, and now you have to give the candy away. And it's not the same thing, and there's a sadness. And on the other hand, you get to hang out, you got to go to the Halloween party and stay out till 2 a.m. As you can tell, I'm drawn to write things that nobody else is writing. And that was like something I didn't see. Well, anyway, so I wrote the book. I wrote the book back in 2007, and it was an orphaned book, which means my editor, the acquiring editor, had left or been fired, I can't remember which, by the time it was actually released. So this is never a good thing. So the book is given to another editor, but they don't necessarily care. And I was sort of at the end of my career at HarperCollins at the time anyway. I don't think they really cared. The book sort of came out. It actually sold okay, which is surprising because they didn't do a damn thing. I mean, nobody, like I said, it didn't really have an in-house advocate. But I thought it was a really cinematic idea, especially with nods to The Goonies, and then, Stranger Things hit, which really, Stranger Things has exactly the same sensibility, except it's a slightly different genre. And I thought, this would make a good movie. And yet, unlike Geography Club, say, or some of my earlier books, it had received no interest. Even though it had, like I said, it had sold okay, but it hadn't made any real ripple in the industry. And so it hadn't gotten any inquiries. And I thought, well, I'll write the screenplay myself. And I did. And I, honed it for a couple of years. And then I pitched it. And this producer came to me, and he didn't even know. I didn't pitch it as a book. I pitched it as a screenplay. I didn't tell anybody that it had been a book because I didn't feel like that really served me. I mean, the book had not been particularly successful. There's a huge prejudice in Hollywood about novelists adapting their own work, or novelists writing screenplays. That people think correctly that they're two completely different mediums, and that if you write novels, you don't know how to write a screenplay. So I didn't want to complicate the pitch by saying, "Oh, I'm a novelist and this is based on my novels." The producer liked it, and he said, even though this hadn't been part of my pitch, he said, "I really like that you're targeting this market in between the middle grade and the edgy young adult. This is exactly the movie that I'm looking for." And I knew when he said that, I said, okay, well, this is a match made in heaven. That he was looking to produce a movie because he had seen the same void in the marketplace that I had seen, 10 years before, 8 years before when I was writing the book. And that's the movie he wanted to produce. And so that's what we did. That's what he did. And then we revised that for, how long was the development process? 4 years from the beginning of an option to production, 4 years. That's pretty fast. He's raising the financing while we're developing the script. And then we shot, it's set in my hometown. It has a racism element, and it's set in my hometown of Tacoma, Washington. but it was we had to change it into sort of a any town. And we shot it in Pennsylvania last summer, and I was able to go for the whole shoot. And honestly, this is an indie film. It was not like a multi-million-dollar Hollywood budget. And I was thinking, there's a complicated script. There's underwater sequences. They dive for sunken treasure, so there's underwater sequences. There's a series of smuggler tunnels, caverns underneath the city. That's one of their schemes. So it's like, so you have to find tunnels under the city. They're going to have to build sets. There's all kinds of, there's a cast of, I think there's 29 different speaking parts and zillions of different scenes. And I was thinking, how is he going to do this? This is not the kind of script, if I were producing an indie film and I wanted to do it on a budget, this is not the script that I would pick. But he had picked it, and then it wasn't. So I'm in until the day I arrived, I'm thinking, is this going to be, what is this going to be? Is this, plus this is his first film. He's produced short films and educational films. That's how he makes his money, but he had not produced a feature. And I was shocked. When I got there, I saw that basically he had called in every favor he had ever had in the world, every filmmaking favor. And he had very, very, very smartly gone into a town. I don't know if I should tell this story, but I will. So they were negotiating. Part of it is set in a shopping mall. So they rented a shopping mall for a week. And one of the scenes is set in a candy store. And they were negotiating with the candy store owner, and they said, here's the amount of money here's the amount of money. And the candy owner said, oh, I don't know that we can pay you that much. That's an awful lot for us to pay you. And the producer said, or the production manager said, oh no, that's what we're paying you. You don't pay us anything. We rent the store from you. The point being, the town hadn't had a movie shot there. The last movie was Molly, shot 20 years ago. And they were so eager, unlike a lot, you go to Louisiana, you go to New Orleans, you go to New York, you go to Los Angeles, you go to Vancouver. The towns are rife with productions, but because he picked this out-of-the-way town, they bent over backwards to help us, and
That's awesome.
It saved him so much money. It was fantastic. He was so shrewd about it, and I'm big on, follow your artistic vision. Yeah, that's great, and stick to your vision and be true to all of that, but be smart about it. And he was smart about it, and that made me really like him, not just as a person, but as a businessman. I don't want to be in bed with a crazy head in the clouds, refusing to compromise on anything artiste. I want somebody who gets the fucking thing done, who gets the job done. And I want it to look good, but ultimately I want it to be produced, to be finished. And it's not that he made compromises, it's just that he was very, very smart about how he went about it. I've only seen the distributor pitch cut, which is not the full cut of the movie. But great cast. I really loved the way it looked, and I'm cautiously optimistic. We'll see,
Cool. For a book you wrote in 2007, came out in 2009, it looks like. We're now a decade on. It still sounds like this could be today's teens, because you could see parents today going, okay, well, you're 15 now. You really need to go make some money. It sounds like the material might have aged well, too.
Well, it is interesting, because the book came out right during the crash, right during the real estate, right during the economic crash of the late aughts. And it's like, it was not a good time for kids to be complaining about not having jobs because nobody had a job. You know what I mean? It was like out of zeitgeist. And now it does feel like it is more timely. But that's the thing, movies, I'm working on another project now. And this one is maybe, I don't want to jinx anything, but it could end up in Netflix. That's sort of the current incarnation. But anyway, I've been working on this since 2009. It was first optioned by these particular producers. It was based on a play that I wrote in 1997, and it is about, so it's one kid, his best friend commits suicide, and so our main character refuses to believe that his friend would commit suicide, and so he searches his memories of their past year together, which is what the bulk of the story is, trying to figure out why he committed suicide. And over the course of that time, even though the main character is straight, he realizes, oh, my best friend was in love with me, and I think I was in love with him too. So the point is, I'm writing about fluid sexuality and the idea, what is love, what is sex, what is sexual attraction. This was written in 1997. It's now 2020. When I wrote it in 1997, it had a different meaning. This was part of the script, the fluid sexuality, but it was more about, it was more about coming out and finding refuge in the people who know your real self. And that was important in 1997 because that was what's relevant for LGBTQ 18-year-old in 1997. That's less relevant. Being alone is less likely. You can go online. You're not alone in 2020. But now the fluid sexuality thing is extremely relevant. It's like, and that hasn't, I don't want to, maybe I shouldn't be talking about this on a public forum, but it's like, this has not really been explored. And I feel like this, to me, is really interesting territory. And I think it's partly luck that I wrote a story that is still timely, almost, oh my God, that's more than 20 years. But I guess I want to pat myself on the back a little bit in that I was dealing with, people say, oh, it's Gen Y and Gen Z that came up with this concept. No, they didn't. We were talking about this back in the 80s and the 90s. It's always been a thing. And it is exciting that I feel like I can still contribute culturally, even though, I'm older now. But no, I get these issues. I hope I do. Netflix seems to think that we do. So hopefully, I can share this in 2 years we'll be talking about this movie. But it is always a challenge. I guess what I was going to say is, as writers, we're always trying to pick where culture is going, where the zeitgeist is going, and you don't want to be out of zeitgeist. But it's impossible. That's literally impossible to pick the future. All you can do is try to find the things that speak to your heart and that speak to, try to find the specific that's also universal.
Any rough timelines for Project Payday? When we might see it? It should be out. See, this is what's being negotiated now. And I know he wants a theatrical release, so knock on wood, it'll be at least a small theatrical release. On the other hand, if it's acquired by a streaming service, that's okay too, because so many people see it right away. Yeah.
And frankly, it's cheaper. But it should be 2020. It should be this year.
Great.
It is not. We don't have a final edit. It hasn't been scored. It hasn't been, like I said, we don't even have a final product, but it should be out. And I got a chance to, so I got the rights back to the book, which was out. It was still in print, I think, but I got the rights back last year. And then I rewrote the book to coincide with the movie, because a lot of, it is however many years, 15 years, and things have changed. I had always imagined the main character, the point of view character, is gay, but now I was able to, it was always subtext, and it's subtext in the movie, but it's text in the book. I was able to explore, go a little deeper in the book. And again, there's such a rush. I know I sound like an old prude, but there's such a rush to sexualize everything. And I think, especially in YA, I mean, on one hand, you couldn't sexualize anything. So it's great that now we have that freedom as writers, and I applaud that, and I've read books that I think are great. Yes, explore sex, explore sexual desire. But it's also okay to explore the more reticent gay kid who, it's like, well, wait a minute, I'm not ready for sex. I recognize I will be one day, but I'm 15, and right now I want to hang out with my friends. And that's a scary mysterious door that I'm not ready to open. That's a perfectly valid character too, and I think that I talk to these kids all the time online. People who read my books, and it's like they're not. I remember the thing that struck me the most when I was working with gay kids was there's this idea that it's like they all want sex. They all are obsessed with sex. It's like, no, my experience is they all want a boyfriend or a girlfriend. They want a relationship, and sex is important, but anybody can look at porn. You can explore those fantasies these days online, but you can't have a boyfriend, on porn. There's no such thing as a porn boyfriend. And everybody, they want, the secret to life is that we all just want connection. We all just want somebody to accept us for who we are, no questions asked. That's what we're all yearning for. It's what we all want. That's what the characters in Project Payday have, but they're friends. They recognize that they have that kind of relationship, and they don't want to move on to the next phase where suddenly that's complicated with boys and girls and relationships and sex. They recognize they will go there one day. And frankly, that's the subplot in the Otto books too, that Russell and Otto, Otto as a boyfriend and Russell as a husband, and that's cool. And I explored that in earlier books. but the idea that they are friends and that they can count on each other. And I think we all want that more than anything in the world, that when things go wrong, is there somebody we can turn to? When things, if we're not married, or even if we are married and things go bad with our relationship, is there somebody who will always be there for us? No matter what happens in our romantic life, they will always be there. And they get us, on some fundamental level. They get us. They understand us, and we don't need to explain ourselves because they already know who we are. We all want that. And so I'm fascinated. I think that's a more interesting connection to me right now at this point in my life. That's a more interesting connection to me than the sexual one. I know a lot of people are obsessed with the sex thing, but I think it's the deeper connection that is really what we all want. And frankly, I think a lot of us turn to sex to get that, even though what we really want is sort of that deeper relationship connection. Sex is great too, and there are probably people who disagree with me and say, I don't want a relationship, or I don't need that kind of emotional support from my friends, and that's fine too. I'm not trying to lay a judgment on people. I'm just saying, for me as a writer, I'm fascinated by this yearning. It feels like I have, and that a lot of people have, to have people know our true self and still accept us.
Yeah, I think it's even more true in this online era that we live in, where you don't get necessarily probably never true self online. So
absolutely, That's a good point. I totally agree.
Let's talk about your travels. So you and your husband, Michael Jensen, who has been on the show before as well, you guys have been traveling for like the last 3 years now. You packed it up, left Seattle, and have been on this kind of nomad adventure, living your life around the world.
We love it. It's the smartest thing we've ever did. The night of the election, we were with our good friends, our best friends, who are a lesbian couple. They had thrown an election party, and we had gone, and we were all excited to celebrate the first female president. And of course, Trump was elected, and we all wanted to kill ourselves. The party ended 30 minutes after it started, and Michael and I were driving home, and we felt like shit, like in much of the world. We just felt hopeless. We had always planned at some point that we were going to travel the world for a while. This had always been the plan, but it was always sort of a later kind of thing. Well, we'll do it. We'll get around to it eventually. We turned to each other and we said, let's sell the house and leave. And it's like we felt so powerless and depressed. And I am like a control freak. When things, this is why I like plot so much. This is like why I like writing. I want to fix problems and I want to solve it. Well, when your country elects an ignorant fascist, racist, I can't, there's no way I can solve that problem. I had done what I could in the election, but I could solve my problem of feeling so frustrated by getting the hell out of Dodge, or at least taking control of my own narrative. And Michael was absolutely on board. And our friends thought, oh yeah, you're not really going to leave. But because we had always planned to do this anyway, we both knew, within 2 months we'd sold our house. And within 8 months, we were on the road. And basically, we are called digital nomads, which means we work remotely. I always wanted to do this because it felt silly. We were living in Seattle. It felt silly to be playing the Seattle premium. Seattle is extremely expensive. It's become like San Francisco. It's one of the most expensive cities in the country. But our income did not reflect that. Our income was the same and is the same wherever we lived. We sold the house for a lot of money because it was Seattle and we had bought it cheaply and things had gone crazy, which gave us a cushion to experiment with. Then we left. We live in a country anywhere from 1 to 3 months, and then we move on because that's how long the visa will last. So we started in Miami, Florida. We moved to Malta in the Mediterranean. Then we lived in Italy. Then we lived in Bulgaria because of something called the Schengen zone. You can only be anywhere in Europe for 3 months, so we had to leave. We ended up in Eastern Europe, which is outside of the Schengen zone. Had no plans to go to Eastern Europe, but friends said, hey, Bulgaria is awesome. It was awesome. We took a cruise ship home. We take repositioning cruises, so we lived on a cruise ship for 2 months as we took a cruise ship back through the Panama Canal and back to Seattle. Then in 2019, we left. We went into Asia. We went to Thailand. We lived in an island in Thailand. Then we lived in Vietnam, which was awesome. We loved Vietnam. We lived in rice fields right outside of Hoi An. Fantastic experience. Came home for the movie shoot in June, which was in Pennsylvania, as I said earlier. Then we continued, took another cruise ship across to Europe. We went to Switzerland. We lived in Switzerland and the Swiss Alps for the summer, which was beautiful, incredibly expensive, but beautiful. Then we went. I feel like I'm missing a couple countries. Then we went to we went back to Eastern Europe. We went to Tbilisi, Georgia, which again was awesome. Came home, took another cruise ship home for the holidays. Now we are in Mexico City, which is also fantastic. It's funny, the State Department issued a travel alert the day before we were to come to Mexico. They said, crime is up. Americans should be wary. I think they were just saying Americans shouldn't go to Mexico. And we had 3 or 4 friends here at the time, and we thought, should we be worried? And they said, there are parts of the United States where you should not go. It's like you've been to Los Angeles, you've been to Chicago or New York. There are places, that are sort of tough, sort of dangerous there. And that's just like Mexico. There are places in Mexico where I wouldn't go. But Mexico City itself, we're in La Condesa and Roma Norte, near the city center. It's a stunningly beautiful city. I had no idea. It's all plazas and parks. The Mexican people are charming. My Spanish still sucks, but I'm learning. There's nothing like immersion to get you to pick up a language. So I'm learning, and we're having a ball. We're going to stay in Mexico, I think, a couple of months, and then depending on what happens with this Chinese virus, we may go back to Asia, we may not. We may just go to Colombia, we may go to South America. But the point is, we love our life, and we thought it would be really expensive. And in fact, our cost of living is about half what it was in Seattle, and it could be a lot cheaper if we wanted it to be, if we wanted to live in, a little more frugally. We just don't deprive ourselves. And the other thing that's been really, really wonderful, we thought we would be lonely. We thought we would be isolated. How do you get to know people? Well, because there is this digital nomad community around the world now, and because they're all awesome people, it's like, I like to say, nobody leaves home because they're happy with their life. Everybody leaves home because they don't quite fit in, because they feel like they have a yearning for something more. So it's kind of like the island of misfit toys. Everybody's a little dorky, everybody's a little quirky, and so are we. And the other interesting thing, we're in our 50s, early 50s, and most of our friends are now in their 20s and 30s, which has been really interesting. And I think they think of us as peers. I know they think of us as peers. We think of them as peers. Occasionally they'll ask us, advice, but for the most part, we sort of see each other as peers. So it is great to be around sort of this young, open-minded, positive energy. This has made me feel empowered. I'm around young people, like we can exchange ideas. I have my perspective because I have an older perspective, and they have a younger perspective, and that's interesting. But I don't feel like I don't feel like okay boomered by these people. I feel accepted. They're not like going to dismiss me because of my age, and I'm not going to dismiss them. I'm not going to say, oh, millennials, or oh, you Gen Y. It feels like there's a meeting of minds. And so it has been really awesome to meet these people. And so as opposed to being isolated, we feel more connected. I mean, I'm an introvert, like times 50. I wanted to stay home. I want to Netflix and chill, but it's so, plus every city other than anything in the United States is so much more livable because everything's so walkable. Like I said, Mexico City is all these sidewalk cafes and plazas and parks, and everything is, from a Western perspective, everything is cheap. So we find ourselves being so much more social. It has been a reinvention that I didn't think I was capable of at my age. I didn't think I wanted to reinvent myself, and yet I have, and Michael has too, and we've been surprised by things. All of my life I thought I had work-life balance, but it wasn't until I left the United States that I realized, oh, I didn't have work-life balance at all. Because it's hard to have work-life balance because everything's so goddamn expensive. You have to kill yourself. For Michael and myself, I don't want to sound judgy, I really don't, and I hope I'm not coming across that way, but for us it has been, we were at a very low point, both politically and career-wise, and we felt very frustrated. Things had not gone our way, and we had so many disappointments in our career. And now it feels like, like all writing careers, you have successes and you have disappointments. Now they are put in perspective because there are so much else. The rest of our lives are richer now. The more people I meet around the world, the differences are what make it fascinating. It's like I love being forced to see something about myself or my country from a different point of view. The reality is we really have so much in common, and we are just so much alike, and we are all yearning for that connection, that so many people have opened their hearts and their minds to us. And you mentioned, online, the alienation. I used to think social media was bringing people together, and I don't believe that anymore. I feel like now it is driving people apart more than it's bringing them together. And that makes me sad. That makes me very sad because it feels like the world is coming apart. But there is still this yearning for connection, and there are so many people, because I've experienced it. I feel like I see it every day. When I meet people in real life, it makes me feel so open-hearted and hopeful. It makes me feel optimistic about the future. So it was, for me, this was just what we needed to get out of that mindset, whatever it was, the rut that I was in. And it makes me feel like, oh God, humanity's not doomed. There are still all these wonderful people.
But I'm curious what this 3-year journey has done for your creativity overall.
I wouldn't say the well had gone dry, but there are certain topics, Project Sweet Life, Project Payday, that is based on an experience I had. Geography Club, that's based on an experience I have. The later Russell books, the screenwriting, based on experiences I had in Hollywood. The well of my personal life had begun to run dry. So it has been interesting to have the well be refilled about all these other things. And now I do find myself writing about places and people that I wouldn't have felt qualified to write about before, and even now I'm not sure I feel qualified to write about. But I feel qualified to write about the experience of travel. And I have written several screenplays about just what it's like to travel. I wrote a thriller, Two People in an Airbnb. And when you meet somebody on the road, all you know about them is what they are presenting to you. Their past could be anything in the world. They could be a killer. They could be a monster. They could be a literal monster. You just don't know. And you have to figure that out. And so I've written that from the point of view of a thriller where two people are sharing an Airbnb and they both think the other has killed somebody. And the reality is even worse than that. There's something else going on in the Airbnb. And I've also written about it in a more positive way. I sort of wrote I guess you would say it's like Eat, Pray, Love meets Four Weddings and a Funeral, and that it's the story of a woman as she travels the world as a digital nomad like myself, and her path keeps crossing with another digital nomad, but circumstances are never right that they can be like Four Weddings and a Funeral. And so over the course of 3 different countries, their paths keep crossing. So it has been wonderful to be excited about and to do things, that are way out of my bailiwick. But I don't think I'm probably ever going to write young adult again. I've written realistic YA fiction. I've written realistic YA romances. Now I want to do other stuff. Michael and I just finished writing a memoir of our first 2 years together. Writing a book with your husband is enormously difficult because, of course, the job of a spouse is to be supportive and non-critical, and the job of a co-writer is to be ultra-critical and to be very judgmental. And so the two things don't go together. So we've had to hash out what it means to write together. That's been really difficult, but it's also been really fun and really interesting. It's been an interesting project, and now we're just about done, and we really like the project. And hopefully you can tell all my enthusiasm for what we've done, and we're trying to share that with the book, try to be advocates or emissaries for this lifestyle. And also just sort of tell the story of what has happened.
Do you think the memoir will make its way out this year?
We should have a draft for beta readers in a couple of months. We're going to edit, and then we should have a draft, and then go to our agents, who, it really depends. This one this will definitely not be self-published. This feels, we wrote this as a big, bold, mainstream memoir. I feel like publishers could see, because this is sort of an exploding phenomenon, and there haven't been a lot of memoirs by people who have done this. So it feels like, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but then this is me trying to anticipate the zeitgeist, which is always a mistake. But the point is to get this out to publishers, and then hopefully it'll be out, 3 years from now,
Right.
2 years from now at best. Ironically, it is the book that I'm most proud of at this point. That it'll be easy for me to publicize because I feel so enthusiastic about the story we're telling.
Mm-hmm. So Otto has just come out. Project Payday hopefully is sometime this year, it looks like. Anything else on the 2020 timeline to talk about?
Well, hopefully, I would love to be able to talk about this other movie, this drama that I was talking about earlier, The Starfish Scream, and I hope that happens because that has been a wild ride, and it'll be very unsatisfying if we did all this work and the world is never able to see it. What else am I working on? I'm pitching screenplays this week and next week, and I've got a fantasy that I'm working on too that is not ready to go out yet. But part of the problem is I'm all over the place. I like to write so many different things, and sometimes I feel like sometimes I think I should just pick a genre and stick to it for a couple of years, but I can't seem to do that.
What is the best way for everyone to keep up with you so they know what is coming next and how some of these other projects come to fruition?
My website, you can sign up for my newsletter on my website. You can follow me on social media. I generally am on Twitter more than I'm on Facebook, but you can do either. You could also follow Michael and I on Instagram, which is Brent and Michael Are Going Places. That's also our website, brentandmichaelaregoingplaces.com. And I have a policy that I will talk to anybody. I have sort of an open IM policy. If somebody wants to chat with me, I am available. Feel free to, you can also send me an email. I don't get very many emails anymore, though. It's mostly through social media these days.
Fantastic. We'll link to all of that in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming and telling us all about these projects and about your nomad life.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey.